The night the rain told the truth. 2 seconds of complete silence. Then the rain arrives, not gently, not gradually, all at once, the way Houston storms announce themselves. The kind of rain that sounds like the sky is trying to break something open. Thunder that doesn't crack so much as roll, low, long, and inevitable, like a stone door being dragged shut somewhere high above the clouds. Somewhere inside that storm, a woman is running. She is barefoot. She is 6 months pregnant. One hand is pressed flat against her stomach. Not dramatically, not for show, the way a mother's hand moves before the mind even gives the order. The other hand is wrapped around a phone she is too afraid to answer. Her feet are hitting wet pavement so hard she can feel every crack and seam of the concrete through the soles of her feet. Her dress is soaked through, maternity fabric clinging to a body that is carrying more weight than anyone should have to carry alone. The parking lot stretches ahead of her like something designed to be endless. Behind her, headlights. Not rushing. Not aggressive. Patient. The patience of something that has already decided how this ends and sees no reason to hurry. The headlights belong to a black SUV. The SUV belongs to a man. The man is her pastor. His name is Caleb Whitmore. And he has 42 million reasons, at minimum, to make sure this woman never reaches the gate at the far end of that parking lot. Her name is Maya Brooks. She is 29 years old. She has been singing in his church for 10 years. And tonight, in the rain, at midnight, barefoot and 6 months pregnant, she is running for her life from the man who told her God had sent him specifically to her. Before this night is over, everything will have changed. Not just for Maya. For him. For the 12,000 people who called that church their home. For the 14 million people who watched him on television every Sunday morning and believed, truly, completely believed, that Caleb Whitmore was the closest thing to a living saint they had ever seen. Everything. 37 seconds against $42 million. The story is about power. About what a certain kind of man does when he builds an empire on the Word of God and then decides the Word of God applies to everyone except himself. About a woman who was told she was chosen. Who was told she was set apart. Who was told, by a man who performed holiness with the precision of a surgeon, that God himself had sent him to her with a message specifically for her life. And about 37 seconds. 37 seconds of audio, recorded on a phone in a rainstorm, by a woman hiding between parked cars who believed she might not survive the night. 37 seconds that no amount of money, no legal team, no institutional weight, no $42 million empire could erase. 37 seconds that brought everything down. Every second of what follows matters. The empire that made him untouchable. Before the fall there was the rise. And the rise of Caleb Whitmore was the kind of American story that people build entire belief systems around, because it seemed like proof of something. Proof that faith moves mountains. Proof that God rewards the faithful. Proof that a man with nothing but conviction and the right words can build something that lasts. He started with 63 people. Not a congregation. Not a church. 63 people in a rented community center in southwest Houston on a Sunday morning. Folding chairs in uneven rows. A second-hand sound system that cut in and out if you stood too close to the left speaker. A folding table serving as the pulpit. 22 years later, Restoration Covenant Church had become one of the 10 largest religious institutions in the United States. 12,000 seats. Not 12,000 members, 12,000 seats, filled to capacity every single Sunday, with overflow into 3 satellite viewing rooms and 4 additional campuses across 3 states. A live broadcast that reached 14 million households every Sunday morning. The kind of reach that television networks restructure their entire programming strategies to achieve. Caleb Whitmore had written 4 books. All 4 landed on the New York Times bestseller list. He had a podcast with 11 million subscribers. He had been invited to deliver the opening prayer at a congressional session. He had spoken at the White House. He had received humanitarian awards at black tie galas attended by people whose names appear in history books. He had been given the keys to the city of Houston not once, but twice, and on the second occasion, the mayor stood at the podium and called him, without apparent irony, the conscience of our city. His personal net worth, $42 million. Much of it flowing through a non-profit corporate structure that federal investigators would later spend months carefully, painstakingly untangling, and describe in their official documentation as creatively arranged. But the money was never the real story. The platform was never the real story. What made Caleb Whitmore something beyond merely successful, what made him genuinely extraordinary in a way that also made him genuinely dangerous, was what he could do to a room full of people. He could walk onto a stage in front of 12,000 strangers and within 4 minutes, Make every single one of them feel as though he were speaking directly and only to them. As though God had handed him a private note about their specific life, their specific fears, their specific wounds, their specific dreams, and he was reading it out loud just for them. 17 members of his former congregation were interviewed in the preparation of this story. Every single one of them, without being prompted, used the same word when they described what it felt like to be in Caleb Whitmore's presence. Not impressed. Not entertained. Not inspired, though they were all of those things. In a world where most people move through their entire lives feeling largely invisible, Caleb Whitmore had the ability to make 12,000 people simultaneously feel found. He had spent 22 years perfecting that ability. Not, it would turn out, for the reason they thought. The woman they never saw coming. Most of the coverage of this case spent its time talking about Caleb Whitmore. The empire. The fall. The charges. The verdict. And it should have. But in doing so, most coverage rushed past the person this story is actually about. The person without whom there would be no case, no charges, no verdict, no reckoning of any kind. They rushed past Maya. You cannot understand what Caleb Whitmore did, the full architecture of it, the full weight of it, the full cold calculation behind it, unless you understand who Maya Brooks was before he selected her. So before anything else, Maya. Maya Brooks was born and raised in Houston's 3rd Ward. She grew up inside the church the way some children grow up inside music, not as something her parents brought her to, but as the air she was formed inside of. Her mother sang soprano in the choir. Her grandmother had served on the deacon board for 31 years. Faith in the Brooks household was not a weekend activity. It was as structural as the walls of the house itself. From the time Maya was 4 years old, people knew she had something. Not simply a good voice, though it was that, undeniably and remarkably. Something that lives underneath a good voice when God, or genetics, or some combination of the two decides to be extraordinarily generous with a person. When Maya sang, she didn't perform a song. She became it. She took the room inside the song with her. People who heard her for the first time described the experience not as being entertained but as being held. Outside those church walls, Maya's life looked like the lives of many young black women in a city like Houston. Working 2 jobs by 22. Still working 2 at 27. Restaurant work during the week, closing shifts because the tips were better after 9 p.m. and Maya had learned long ago to make her decisions based on the math, not the convenience. Weekend catering work when she could get it. Behind on rent more months than she was caught up. A medical bill she had been paying down $20 at a time for 2 years. Dreams, real ones, specific ones, the kind that have shape and texture, that she kept folded very small and very private, because she had learned that dreaming out loud when you are exhausted is a particular cruelty you eventually stop doing to yourself. She was lonely. Not in the way that people mean when they want more social plans. In the specific, cellular loneliness of a person who has been grinding alone for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like when someone else voluntarily carries part of the weight. But Sunday morning was different. On Sunday morning, Maya Brooks walked into Restoration Covenant Church and something shifted. The exhaustion fell away. The bills fell away. The loneliness fell away. She stepped into her choir robe, walked to that microphone, and opened her mouth, and 12,000 people felt something move through the room that they would go home and try to describe to the people who hadn't been there and find that they couldn't, quite. Her choir director, Sister Patricia Owens, who had directed the Restoration Covenant Choir for 16 years, pulled Maya aside after service one Sunday and said something she would carry for the rest of her life. She said, "Baby, when you open your mouth you remind people that God is real." That was what Maya gave to that church every Sunday. Without fail. Without request for compensation beyond the community itself. Without anything asked in return. And Caleb Whitmore, who had built his entire life on the ability to see precisely what people needed and provide an exact imitation of it, had been watching Maya sing for 3 years. He knew what she needed. He had known for some time. He was waiting for the right moment to offer it. The compliment that cost nothing and bought everything. It started with a compliment. But not the kind of compliment that washes over you and disappears. The kind that stops you where you are standing. The kind that feels, in the moment it lands, less like something a person said and more like something revealed. Most people who passed Maya after Sunday service offered some version of "great job today." 3 words delivered while already moving toward the parking lot. The kind of acknowledgement that is really just social maintenance. It costs nothing and changes nothing. Caleb Whitmore stopped. He stopped walking in a hallway full of people competing for his time, and he turned toward Maya with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who had nowhere else to be, in a life where he had somewhere to be every minute of every day. And he said, multiple witnesses would later confirm the specific wording of this exchange. He said, during the second song this morning, when you held that final note and the room went completely silent before the applause started, in that silence I felt God tell me that you are carrying something inside you that this congregation is going to desperately need. And I don't think you know yet. I don't think anyone has told you how significant you actually are. How significant you actually are. Consider what those words do to a specific person at a specific point in their life. A woman who has been invisible all week. Who has been taking orders and absorbing other people's frustration and counting change since Monday morning. Who drove to this building in a car that needed new brakes she hadn't yet found the money for, wearing a robe she washed in her kitchen sink because the laundromat cost money she needed elsewhere that week. This woman. In this moment. Being told by the most powerful, most respected, most admired man she has ever stood close to, that God sees her specifically. That her significance is not something she has to perform or produce or earn. That she matters simply because she is who she is. He said nothing inappropriate. He touched nothing. He made no request. He simply performed the act of truly seeing her, with a precision and a completeness that felt, in that moment, like the most genuine thing that had ever happened to her. Ann Maya Brooks felt something she had not felt in longer than she could name. That she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The exchange lasted less than a minute. It cost Caleb Whitmore nothing. It was the first brick of the trap. The envelope with the wax seal. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the church office with Maya's name written across the front in careful, formal script. Cream paper. The church's official seal pressed into the wax on the back. A handwritten invitation on pastoral letterhead, requesting Maya's presence at a private one-on-one spiritual development session with Pastor Whitmore himself. Not a group meeting. Not a ministry event. Private. Personal. Requested by the pastor directly. Sister Patricia wept when Maya showed her. Maya's mother called 3 people before dinner was on the table. Because in that congregation, in that specific community where Caleb Whitmore's attention was the closest earthly equivalent to divine endorsement, an invitation like this was not simply an honor. It was a signal. It meant the pastor had identified something in you. That God had spoken to him specifically about your life. That you had been set apart from the thousands. Maya walked into that office feeling, for the first time in years, like something good was turning in her direction. She would describe that first session to federal investigators in detail so complete and precise that they would later call it one of the most thorough first-hand accounts received in the entire investigation. She described how he had tea waiting. Her preferred tea. A detail she had mentioned once in passing 6 months earlier and had never thought about again. She described how he remembered specific things she had said after services over the previous year. Small things. Offhand things. Things she hadn't realized he had registered. She described how he shared something personal, a private struggle, a moment of doubt that lived behind the public confidence. Something he said he had never told anyone. And how the offering of that private thing created, almost immediately, the feeling of being trusted. Of being his equal in something real. She described how, at the end of the session, he closed his eyes and prayed over her. And how he named, with a specificity that felt impossible, the exact fear she had never said out loud. The exact dream she had kept folded small and private for so long she had half convinced herself it wasn't real. He named them. In prayer. Over her. Maya sat in her car in the church parking lot for 40 minutes after that session ended. Not because anything inappropriate had happened. Not because anything had been said that could be reported or questioned. But because she had just experienced something that felt like the most real spiritual moment of her entire life. What she had actually experienced was a master class. In manufactured intimacy. Delivered by a man who had been refining the performance for over a decade. She didn't know that yet. She thought God had finally found her. He had simply finished selecting her. How you build a trap someone walks into willingly. What Caleb Whitmore did to Maya Brooks over the following 8 weeks has a clinical name. It is called coercive grooming. It is documented in psychological literature. It is recognized in federal law. And it works on intelligent people, on educated people, on strong people, on skeptical people, on people who would bet their lives on their own ability to recognize manipulation, specifically because it is designed to be indistinguishable from the inside from love. It does not feel like a trap. It feels like finally being chosen. Here is how it worked. Week by week. Week 1, he moved from behind his desk. That is week 1. The entire week. He simply moved from the position of authority, behind the desk, looking down, to the sitting area. 2 chairs facing each other as equals. And then he shared a secret. A personal struggle. A moment of private doubt behind the public confidence. Something he said he had never told anyone. This is called reciprocity. He gives her something that appears vulnerable, real or manufactured, the effect is identical, and now she is holding his private truth. She is his partner. She is, psychologically, already inside the relationship before she has consciously decided to enter it. Week 2, a text message. After 9 p.m. His personal number, not the church office, not an assistant, his personal number. Asking if she had a moment to pray about something heavy on his heart. The boundary between pastor and congregation, erased in 11 words. Week 3, he attended her choir rehearsal. Sat alone in the back of the room for 2 hours. Said nothing to anyone. When rehearsal ended and everyone else left, he stayed. They talked alone in the empty sanctuary for an hour. In the dark. In the most sacred space she has ever known. He made it feel chosen. He made her presence in that space feel like it had been ordained. Week 4, a book arrived at her apartment. Not the church mailbox. Her apartment. With a handwritten note tucked inside, specific, personal, the kind of note that makes you feel that someone has been paying careful attention to your soul. She framed the note. Not the book. The note. Week 5, a dinner. Private room in an upscale restaurant on the west side. His security detail stayed in the car. No one from the church knew. Phones face down on the table between them. And this was the pivot, because now it was a secret. And the secret was the thing that made her feel most chosen. Because secrets create a specific kind of bond. A closed circuit between two people that is very, very difficult to open from the outside. Week 6, the first physical contact. Her hand. Just her hand. Nothing more. But with eye contact held 2 full seconds past the point of neutrality. And a silence that communicated, clearly and completely, everything the words were not yet saying. Weeks 7 and 8, Maya began canceling plans. She was less available to friends, to family, to the people who had known her longest and might have recognized the shape of what was happening. Her world was narrowing without her feeling it narrow, because the person at the center of it made her feel like she was expanding into something larger than anything she had known before. And then the line was crossed. The line that cannot be uncrossed. And Maya, exhausted in ways she hadn't fully named, isolated in ways she hadn't fully noticed, believing with everything in her that she was inside something real and reciprocal and chosen, believed she had finally arrived somewhere she had always been meant to be. She was inside a trap. She simply could not feel the walls yet. And this is the part where the question that should never be asked tries to surface. Why didn't she see it? Why didn't she leave? Here is the answer, given once, completely, so it never has to be asked again. Because she was walked there. Step by deliberate step. Week by calculated week. Her trust built up and her discernment walked down so gradually, by someone so practiced, that there was never a single moment when the ground shifted enough for her to feel it shift. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is not a failure of strength. That is what a predator with 11 years of practice looks like when he selects his target carefully. Maya was not his first. She was simply the first who fought back. The double life he engineered with precision. Here is what a double life looks like when you have the money and the infrastructure to build one correctly. It does not look reckless. It does not look like a man who is afraid of getting caught. It looks like a system. Like something engineered over years by someone who has identified every possible failure point and addressed each one in advance. Private lines. Trusted drivers who understand that their employment depends on not understanding certain things. Locations selected for their exits rather than their entrances. Financial arrangements routed through structures that take forensic accountants months to reconstruct. A communications discipline so precise that his own legal team, in the early days of the investigation, was initially impressed by how little he had left behind. Initially. On Sunday mornings, Caleb Whitmore stood before 12,000 people and said, "Marriage is a covenant before God that this culture is desperate to cheapen. There is no such thing as a convenient relationship. There is only commitment, radical, sacrificial, holy commitment, or there is nothing." His wife in the front row. Perfect and proud. Her hand reaching up to touch his as he passed the pulpit. Wednesday nights. A man of God must honor every woman in his life with the same reverence he brings to the altar. The way a man treats a woman who cannot give him anything is the truest measure of his character. Women in the audience writing it down. Posting it online. Sending it to their daughters. And then, the other 6 days. The federal investigation would later determine that Caleb Whitmore had been maintaining a second life for at least 11 years before Maya Brooks. 11 years. There had been others. A woman from the main congregation who had left quietly after signing documents her closest friends said she never fully explained. A former administrative assistant who relocated to another city within 90 days of her departure. No notice, no farewell service. A woman from the Dallas satellite campus who had signed a non-disclosure agreement, 17 pages, specific and airtight, drafted by attorneys who knew exactly what they were doing, for a sum of money that seemed significant until you understood what she was permanently surrendering in exchange for it. None of them had spoken publicly. Because a congregation that loves a pastor the way Restoration Covenant loved Caleb Whitmore becomes, over time, a closed immune system. It identifies threats to its central belief and rejects them. When a woman leaves quietly, when she simply disappears from the seats she used to fill, nobody asks why. Because asking why might require them to sit with an answer. And the answer might cost them the thing around which their entire understanding of God has been organized. Caleb Whitmore had not built an empire despite understanding this psychology. He had built it because of it. He had 11 years of unbroken evidence that the system worked exactly as designed. He had never encountered Maya Brooks. He had never, in 11 years of this, made a mistake this expensive. 5:47 in the morning. Maya was 4 weeks late before she allowed herself to buy the test. She had reasons. Good reasons. Stress which was chronic. Exhaustion which was constant. She drove to a pharmacy 20 minutes from her apartment, not her neighborhood, somewhere no one would recognize her, and bought 2 tests. Because one felt like something she might talk herself out of. She drove home. She sat in her bathroom for 3 hours with the unopened bag sitting on the counter in front of her. At 5:47 in the morning she opened it. She took the first test. She waited. She took the second. Positive. Both. She told investigators months later that the first thing she felt was not fear. Was love. Sudden. Enormous. Immediate. A love that arrived before any calculation, before any thought about what came next. Because whatever had led to this moment, however frightening, however complicated, there was a life inside her. And Maya Brooks had been formed in a tradition that understood life as sacred before anything else. More sacred than timing. More sacred than circumstance. More sacred than convenience. She already loved this baby. In that bathroom. At 5:47 in the morning. Before anything was figured out. And then the second thing arrived. Seconds behind the first, moving in the opposite direction. Cold where the love was warm. Heavy where the love was weightless. Because the father of the child she already loved was not simply a man with a complicated personal situation. He was a man with $42 million. A legal team on permanent retainer. A congregation of 12,000 people whose entire spiritual identity had been organized around his perfection. A television platform reaching 14 million households. A wife who appeared on Christian programming every third Thursday. A family that 12,000 people pointed to as evidence that God rewards the faithful. And now there was a woman. On a bathroom floor. Holding 2 positive pregnancy tests. Carrying the one piece of information that threatened all of it. Maya sat on that floor until the sun came fully up over Houston. Then she stood. Got dressed. Went to work. Because she was Maya Brooks. And Maya Brooks kept going. But nothing would ever be the same. How sure are you? Maya spent 11 days deciding how to tell him. She rehearsed it in her car. In the shower at 6 a.m. In the break room at 2 a.m. when the restaurant was finally empty and the chairs were up on the tables. She tried it 100 different ways. With context, without it, with softness, with distance. She landed on directness. Clean and clear. She would say it once. She would not apologize for it. She met him in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. When the office door closed behind her and she looked at him across his desk, she didn't ease into it. She looked at him, at this man who had prayed over her destiny, who had named her secret fears, who had said, "I love you," in a voice she had believed with her whole body, and she said, "I'm pregnant. It's yours. I'm keeping it." 3 sentences. Then she waited. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. And then Caleb Whitmore, pastor, author, television personality, recipient of humanitarian awards, the conscience of a city, looked at her across his desk and said, "How sure are you?" Maya described this moment to federal investigators with words important enough to repeat here precisely. That was the moment I knew. Not just about the pregnancy, not just about what was going to happen next. I knew about all of it. About who he actually was. About what the whole thing had actually been. Because the man I thought I knew, the man I had given myself to, he just wasn't there anymore. There was someone else sitting behind that desk. Someone cold. Someone I didn't recognize. And I know now, that that person had been there the whole time. I had just never said anything that threatened him before. So I had never seen him. He asked her to leave and let him think. 3 hours later, a text arrived on her phone. It said, "We need to handle this carefully. There are people who could get hurt." Handle this. People who could get hurt. Not, "Are you alright?" Not, "I love you." Not, "What do you need?" Not, "I'm scared too." Not a single word that acknowledged her as a person he had told he loved, as a woman carrying his child, as someone whose life had just been irrevocably complicated by a decision they had made together. Handle this. Like a situation that had arrived on his desk on a Tuesday and needed to be processed before it became a larger problem. It was the language of a man doing risk management, not the language of a father. Maya sat in her car in the church parking lot in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, reading that text, and she understood. She understood everything. And she began to plan. The machine that comes for women who won't be quiet. The pressure arrived the way institutional pressure always arrives when there is money and infrastructure behind it. Not like a threat. Like a hand extended in help. Like concern. Like someone looking out for everyone involved, including her. First, a phone call. A known number. A man's voice, professional, practiced, the particular cadence of someone who has made difficult calls before and learned how to make difficult things sound like simple logistics. He introduced himself as an attorney handling a private matter on behalf of a mutual acquaintance. He used those words. Mutual acquaintance. He asked if Maya had legal representation. She did not. He suggested she obtain some before their next conversation and then outlined, briefly and without inflection, several things currently being considered. Then, an envelope. Hand-delivered to her apartment door. Not mailed, hand-delivered. Which was itself a message about what they knew, about how close they could get, about where the edges of her private life actually were. Inside, a non-disclosure agreement. 17 pages. Dense legal language drafted by people who do this for a living against people who have never seen a document like it. And attached to it, with a single paper clip, as though it were an incidental detail. A check for $25,000. The agreement required Maya to permanently surrender her right to name Caleb Whitmore as the father of her child. To never discuss their relationship in any forum, public or private, for the rest of her natural life. Any violation, a financial penalty of $500,000. $500,000. Against a woman whose savings account had never held more than $800 at one time. She took the envelope. She set it on her kitchen table. She looked at it for a long time. She did not sign it. Then came the isolation. Her choir position, the position she had held for 6 years, the identity she had built inside that community, the 1 hour of every week where she felt completely herself, quietly removed from the schedule. No explanation. No meeting. No phone call. The new rotation simply appeared without her name on it. When she asked Sister Patricia looked at the floor and said there had been changes coming from leadership. She would not raise her eyes. Then the social withdrawal. Organized. Quiet. Devastating. Women she had sat beside in worship for years who were suddenly unavailable. Group texts she was no longer included in. Sunday lunches she was no longer invited to. The slow, deliberate, fully coordinated withdrawal of every human connection she had built inside those walls. All at once, all without a single direct conversation, all without anyone ever saying out loud what was happening. Until Maya was sitting in a church she had given 10 years of her life to, feeling as invisible as she had before she ever walked through its doors. Through all of it, the attorney, the NDA, the check, the removed choir position, the organized social erasure, Caleb Whitmore did not call her once. Not once. He sent intermediaries. He sent documents. He sent money. But he did not call. Because calling creates a record. And Caleb Whitmore was still, at this point in the story, very careful about records. The word still will matter soon. The woman building her case in silence. For 6 weeks, while the pressure mounted, while the attorney called back twice, while the NDA sat and signed in her kitchen drawer, while her community fell away person by person. Maya Brooks was doing something that Caleb Whitmore, with all his infrastructure and intelligence and 11 years of this, never anticipated. She was building a file. Every text. Every voicemail. Every exchange, logged by date, by time, by exact words used. The attorney's calls documented with timestamps. The NDA photographed front and back. The check, still attached to it, still uncashed, photographed inside the envelope. Every digital file backed up in 3 separate locations, because Maya had done enough reading to know that evidence has a way of disappearing when powerful people need it to. She was not a lawyer. She had no legal training. She had an associate's degree and a background in food service and a determination that, as it turned out, was worth more than formal training would have been. 847 pages. That is what was in the blue folder Maya Brooks placed in her kitchen drawer before she walked out of her apartment on the night that changed everything. 847 pages of documentation. Built over 6 months. While pregnant. While isolated. While under a sustained pressure campaign that would have broken most people entirely. Federal investigators would later describe it, in their internal documents, as exhibiting an unusual level of evidentiary preparation consistent with knowledge of prosecutorial requirements. She didn't have prosecutorial knowledge. She had something rarer and harder to teach. She was paying attention. She had been preparing, quietly, carefully, completely, for a night she somehow knew was coming. The text that arrived at 11:02 p.m. The text arrived at 11:02 p.m. Maya was 6 months along. She was exhausted in the particular way that only two things operating together in the same body can produce: late pregnancy and sustained fear. The kind of tired that reaches past muscles, past bones, into something fundamental. The kind that sleep, when it came at all, could not fully address. The text said, "We need to meet. In person. Tonight. I'll explain everything. There's a solution. I'll send an address." She read it once. She read it again. Her first instinct, her first physical bodily instinct, was that something was wrong. Not wrong in the way that things had been wrong for months. Wrong in a different register entirely. Wrong in the way that the body communicates before the mind has formed the sentence. She told investigators, "My whole body told me no." Like a cold feeling that started in my chest and went all the way down to my feet and didn't stop. But she also told them something else, and this is the most human part of the entire story, the part that deserves the most gentleness. I still wanted him to be a person. Even then. After all of it, the attorney, the NDA, the check, the silence, all of it, there was still a part of me that wanted him to say he was sorry. That he'd made arrangements. That he was going to do the right thing. I couldn't make myself let go of that piece. She went. But before she left, before she walked out of her apartment into the storm toward an address chosen by a man who had spent months trying to make her disappear, she did something. She took the address he had texted her and she wrote it on a piece of paper. By hand. In pen. And she left it on her kitchen counter, face up, in the center, where anyone who walked through that door would see it immediately. She didn't text the address to anyone. She didn't call anyone to say where she was going. She simply left the paper on the counter and looked at it for a moment. And then she left. Because somewhere below the part of her that still wanted him to be human, in the part that had been building the file, the part that had researched the non-emergency tip line, the part that had 3 backup drives and an unsigned NDA in a drawer, somewhere in that part, Maya Brooks understood that she needed someone to be able to find where she had gone. If she did not come back. The location he chose and why. What happened that night at that location is known from 3 sources. Maya's federal testimony. The 37-second recording she made. And the GPS data from both vehicles, subpoenaed by investigators 10 days later. The location Caleb Whitmore had selected was a decommissioned industrial property on the northwest corridor of the city. A former logistics warehouse. Chain-link perimeter fence. No residential buildings within half a mile. A single security floodlight that illuminated a precise circle of ground and left everything beyond its reach in absolute darkness. It was not chosen at random. When Maya's headlights swept across the lot as she pulled in, she saw his SUV. Engine running. His driver behind the wheel. And Caleb standing under the floodlight. Alone. Or what appeared to be alone. Because at the far edge of the floodlight's reach, at the precise boundary where the light ran out and the dark took over, there was a second vehicle. Engine off. No lights. She couldn't see inside. She walked toward him anyway. Because she was Maya Brooks. And Maya Brooks kept going. The distance between them, investigators would later measure it at approximately 40 feet of wet pavement in a rainstorm, she described as the longest walk of her life. He did not move toward her. He stood under the light and he waited. When she stopped in front of him and looked at his face, she told the jury, in words that would be repeated in reporting on this case for years afterward, "The version of him I had known, the version that had ever looked at me with anything resembling warmth or care, or something I had believed was love, that person was completely absent. What was standing under that light was something else entirely. And I understood, in that exact moment, with absolute clarity, that I was not there for a conversation. I was there for a conclusion. And the conclusion had already been decided before I arrived." She looked at the second vehicle. She looked back at him. And she ran. Barefoot, she had slipped off her shoes without consciously deciding to, the way the body acts before the mind has finished processing. Barefoot, 6 months pregnant, into the darkness beyond the edge of the floodlight, into the rain, toward the fence line and the road beyond it. Behind her, she heard the SUV begin to move. The 37 seconds that destroyed an empire. Maya ran approximately a quarter mile. Through the storm. Through the dark. Past the fence line. Along the service road. Until the construction barriers placed along the warehouse district's back access route forced the SUV to choose a different path, and the distance between her and the headlights grew wide enough for her to breathe. She made it to the outer parking lot of Restoration Covenant Church. The parking lot of the church. The building where she had grown up. Where she had given 10 years of herself. Where she had felt, every Sunday of her adult life, more fully herself than anywhere else in the world. She was hiding in its parking lot in a rainstorm at midnight. Running from the man who led it. She found a concrete pillar. Pressed herself against it. Looked at the phone in her hand. And she made a decision. She didn't call 911. An active call, any sound, any speech, any ambient audio, might give away her exact position. She didn't call her mother. Didn't text a friend. She opened her contacts and called the Houston Police Department's non-emergency tip line. A number she had saved. Deliberately. Specifically. Weeks before this night. Because some part of Maya Brooks, the part that backed up her files in 3 locations, the part that left the paper on the counter, the part that had been quietly preparing for a night she knew was coming, had saved that number. The call went to voicemail. And Maya Brooks, pressing her back against a concrete pillar in the rain at midnight, 6 months pregnant, with the SUV still somewhere in that parking lot, left a message. 37 seconds. In the background audio, the storm. Her breathing controlled to the point of agony. And twice, clearly and unmistakably, the sound of a vehicle moving slowly through the parking lot, tires on wet pavement, searching. In those 37 seconds, Maya stated her full name, her date of birth, her home address, the location she had fled, the name of the man she believed intended to harm her, the name of the church, the pregnancy, the relationship. And then she said the words that would be played in a federal courtroom, on national television, and in a congressional hearing on religious institutional accountability. If anything happens to me tonight, his name is Caleb Whitmore. He is the father of my baby. I have documentation of everything. It's at my apartment, in a blue folder in my kitchen drawer. Please find it. And then, I know this sounds crazy. I know he's a pastor. That's exactly why I'm so scared. 37 seconds. The recording stopped. Maya stayed behind that pillar for 41 minutes. 41 minutes. In the rain. 6 months pregnant. Barefoot on concrete. Not moving. Not making a sound. Until the parking lot was completely quiet and she was certain that whatever had been searching for her had given up and gone. Then she stood up. Smoothed her soaked dress. And walked, not ran, walked, 3 blocks to an all-night gas station. And called her mother. The voice message had already been received. Already been time-stamped. Already existed inside a municipal system that no amount of money, no legal architecture, no $42 million empire could access, alter, or erase. He had $42 million. He did not have 37 seconds. Maya had survived. On her own. The morning the machine started moving. The voice message was reviewed the following morning by Detective Sandra Reyes. 14-year veteran. Financial crime specialist. Recently cross-assigned to a task force that had been carefully, quietly assembled over the previous year to investigate patterns of abuse within religious institutions. A task force built in direct response to 3 separate women who had filed complaints in the previous 18 months that no one had yet formally connected to each other. Detective Reyes sat in a conference room and listened to 37 seconds. When the recording stopped, the room was quiet. Then she picked up her phone and called the FBI. Not because procedure required it at that exact moment. Because the interstate financial structure of Restoration Covenant Church, combined with everything in those 37 seconds, told her immediately that she was looking at something significantly larger than a local criminal matter. The blue folder was retrieved from Maya's kitchen drawer within 4 hours. 847 pages. The investigators who spread those pages across the conference table later said that the experience was unlike anything in their combined decades of investigative work. This was not material assembled in crisis. It was not evidence gathered in panic. It was a document, organized, chronological, cross-referenced, backed by screenshots and timestamps and handwritten logs, that appeared to have been built with full awareness of what would eventually be required to prosecute. Their internal assessment, later released through discovery, subject exhibits unusual level of evidentiary preparation consistent with prosecutorial requirements. Documentation includes preserved digital communications, financial records, witness accounts, and a detailed chronological log spanning 11 months. Recovered deleted text from Caleb Whitmore's church-issued phone, a forensic process requiring a federal warrant and 11 days of technical work, produced over 300 messages. 300 messages he had personally, deliberately erased, containing explicit threats, financial coercion, specific instructions to intermediaries about managing what he himself referred to, in his own words, as the situation, instructions to destroy specific records, and, most critically, communications that placed him physically and intentionally at the industrial lot on the night in question. His own words, his own phone, building a case that his entire legal team, and every dollar of his $42 million, could not dismantle, because Maya had already done the work. 11 women. 1 architecture. 11 years. Within 72 hours of the investigation becoming known in certain circles of the church's inner staff, circles investigators had carefully and quietly entered, 4 women contacted the task force independently. Over the following 10 days, 7 more. 11 total. Ranging in age from 23 to 41. Some current congregation members, some former. A church administrator who had resigned abruptly 3 years prior. A woman from the Dallas satellite campus who had signed a non-disclosure agreement 5 years earlier, who had spent 5 years living inside that silence, who heard Maya's name and came forward regardless. The details of each story varied. The architecture underneath every story did not. Across 11 women, across different years and different circumstances and different versions of the same manufactured intimacy, the same structure. Specific complements that felt like prophecy. Performed vulnerability to manufacture trust. The language of divine destiny deployed as a mechanism of access. Financial pressure when access became inconvenient. Isolation from the people who might recognize the pattern. And then silence. Purchased, coerced, or enforced through the institutional gravity of a church community that needed its central image to remain intact. 11 women. 1 man. 1 architecture that had worked, without exception, for 11 years. Caleb Whitmore's attorneys were informed of the full scope of the investigation on a Friday afternoon. He preached his regular Sunday service anyway. He stood at the door of the church afterward, the way he always had, shaking hands, saying names, making 12,000 people feel seen. Some of those 12,000 people, describing that Sunday to investigators and journalists in the months that followed, said that looking back, something felt different. Something felt like a man performing normalcy with full knowledge that it was the last performance. Something they said felt like a goodbye. It was his last service. 5:47 in the morning, the second time. The street outside Caleb Whitmore's home, a 12,000 square foot pastoral residence provided by the church, on a street so quiet on weekday mornings you could hear the sprinklers running 3 houses over, was completely silent at 5:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. 14 days after Maya Brooks ran barefoot through a rainstorm and left 37 seconds of audio that his empire could not touch. Federal agents do not use sirens when the element of surprise is not required and the subject is not considered a flight risk. They simply arrive. Quietly. With the particular purposefulness of people who have prepared for this specific morning for several weeks. The agents knocked at 5:47. A light came on in an upstairs window at 5:49. The front door opened at 5:52. And Caleb Whitmore stood in the doorway of his church-provided home in clothes that suggested either a sleepless night or dressing quickly in the dark, and the face that had commanded 12,000 people every Sunday morning, that had made 14 million households feel the presence of something holy, that had received standing ovations in stadiums and humanitarian awards at galas and the keys to a city whose mayor called him its conscience. That face was simply tired. Not defiant. Not broken. Not performing anything at all. Just tired. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been maintaining a performance for 11 years and has finally, on a Tuesday morning at 5:52 a.m., been released from the obligation to continue it. He was charged with 5 federal counts. He was placed in handcuffs on the steps of his own home. A neighbor's security camera captured the entire sequence. A church member driving past on her way to an early work shift pulled to the side of the road and sat with both hands pressed over her mouth. The footage was on every platform before 6:30 a.m. By 8 his name was trending in all 50 states. By noon, Restoration Covenant Church had released a 3-sentence statement containing the phrase, "cooperating with authorities," and nothing else of substance. By 3 p.m., his wife had retained separate legal counsel. The man who had been called the conscience of a city. In handcuffs. On his own front steps. 3 miles from the church that had funded every dollar of the life he stood there losing. 22 years to build. 14 days to fall. 4 hours on the stand. Maya Brooks testified for 4 hours across 2 days. Against a defense team that cost $600 per attorney per hour and had spent months preparing specifically to dismantle her account. They questioned her memory, her motivations, her financial circumstances, her character. They used every tool available to attorneys of that caliber against a woman who had none of those resources and arrived with nothing but the truth and the composure to deliver it completely. She answered every question. Directly. Without embellishment. Without visible emotion that could be characterized as performance. Without a single inconsistency across 4 hours of examination from people whose entire professional preparation had been organized around finding one. Sister Patricia Owens, the woman who had once told Maya that her voice made people believe God was real, the woman who had looked at the floor and refused to meet Maya's eyes the day her choir position was quietly removed, took the witness stand on Maya's behalf. She described, in specific detail, the instructions she had received from church leadership to manage Maya's involvement. She was in tears before her testimony was complete. Maya was not. The lead federal prosecutor told journalists afterward, "In 21 years of federal prosecution, Maya Brooks is among the most credible and composed witnesses I have ever had the privilege of placing before a jury." On a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week as the night she had run, as the morning of his arrest, as though Tuesday had become the day this particular story settled all of its outstanding accounts, the verdict was read. Guilty on the first count. Guilty on the second. Guilty. 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 4 counts. His body did not collapse. Did not react visibly. It simply stilled, like a machine that has been running for years and has finally, quietly, been switched off. 9 years in federal prison. A lifetime ban from any leadership role in any religious institution. $1.3 million in restitution to the 11 women identified in the investigation. $8.4 million in church assets forfeited. Restoration Covenant Church filed for organizational restructuring within 30 days. His wife filed for divorce within 60. Maya's daughter was 4 months old on the day her father was sentenced. Her name, and Maya has given full permission for this to be shared, is Grace. What Maya needs you to understand. The most dangerous people in positions of power and trust do not arrive announcing themselves. They do not set off alarms. They do not feel wrong from the beginning. They are the ones who feel the most right. Who say exactly what you needed to hear before you knew you needed to hear it. Who see you, specifically, completely, impossibly, in a way that no one else ever has. Who carry titles that other people have spent lifetimes earning and believing in. Who say that God sent them to you. That you were chosen. That your destiny required them. And they are counting, every single day in every single interaction, on your belief in them being stronger than the quiet, persistent voice inside you that sometimes, in the stillness of an honest moment, says, "Something here is not right." Maya Brooks heard that voice. On the night she drove toward an address in a rainstorm at midnight. On the night her body understood before her mind had finished the sentence. On the night she hid behind a concrete pillar for 41 minutes in the dark without making a sound and pressed record on a phone and said 37 words that cost a $42 million man everything he had built. She heard the voice. And she listened to it. Maya Brooks is not a symbol. She is not a cautionary tale to be processed and filed away. She is a woman who was studied, selected, groomed, pressured, isolated, threatened, and systematically undermined by someone who had made an 11-year career of exactly this, and who believed, based on 11 years of unbroken evidence, that she would behave the same way every woman before her had. He was wrong. She documented. She prepared. She backed up her evidence in 3 separate locations. She saved a phone number she hoped she would never need. She wrote an address on a piece of paper and left it face up on a counter before she walked out the door toward the most dangerous night of her life. She pressed record in a rainstorm. And she waited 41 minutes behind a concrete pillar, in the dark, barefoot, 6 months pregnant, controlling her breathing and not making a sound, until she was certain it was safe to walk to a gas station and call her mother. If something in this story is sitting in your chest in a way you recognize, if something here has activated something in you that you have been looking for the right language to name, do not silence it. Not today. Build your file. Tell someone where you are. Leave the paper on the counter. Maya's instincts saved her life. Her daughter is alive because her mother listened to a voice that told the truth when everything around her was lying. Her daughter's name is Grace. Don't silence yours.